My name is Arthur Wells, and I'm 83 years old. For 52 of those years, I've carried a secret that has kept my life from falling apart. And now, I fear it's about to tear apart everything you think you know about the natural world. I have been feeding what you call Bigfoot every Thursday, ever since my wife, Eleanor, passed away in the cold winter of 1971, right here, on this land. Nestled so deep in the damp woods of Washington's Olympic Peninsula that the rest of the world just fades away. The ritual was the one thing that made sense when nothing else did. It was a reason to get out of bed, a clock to set my week by, when all the days blurred into one long, grey ache. A simple, unspoken agreement. I leave the food, and the silence doesn't swallow me whole. That's the deal. For 52 years, that's been the deal. Thursday is Thursday, and I have never, ever broken the routine. Not until the world broke it for me and left me with a choice I wouldn't wish on any man. You need to believe me. I know how this sounds. An old man, alone in the woods, spinning yarns. But this is real, and I'll tell you how you can know. The deed to my property is a public record in Clallam County. 30 acres. Purchased in 1968, bordering the Olympic National Forest. You can look it up. The cabin I'm speaking from. I built it with my own 2 hands from the Douglas firs I felled on this very land. Eleanor helped me stain the logs. Her fingerprints are probably still sealed in the varnish on the porch railing, right where she'd rest her hand watching the sunset. These are facts. They are solid things in a world that's about to become very fluid. I'm giving you these details because the truth of what I'm about to tell you needs an anchor. It needs a foundation you can touch. Because the story itself, it floats in a place between what is known and what is hidden. I need you to hold on to these solid things. The county records, the wood of this cabin, because you're going to need them. The air here, it has a weight to it. It's not like city air. It's a constant, damp chill that works its way into your bones. A smell of wet earth and pine and decaying leaves that is the very scent of life and death, all at once. And the silence, it isn't empty. It's filled with the quiet, persistent drip of moss hanging from the hemlock branches, the distant, flute-like call of a varied thrush, the scuttling of some small thing in the undergrowth. It's a living silence. But after Eleanor died, that same silence became unbearable. It turned hollow. The dripping of the moss was a clock ticking away the seconds of my life, alone. The bird's call was a question with no answer. Every sound just reminded me of the one sound I would never hear again, her laugh. That's a kind of quiet that can drive a man mad. It's a void. And you will do anything at all, just to feel like you're not the only person left in the universe. You'll even talk to the woods, hoping something talks back. The ritual wasn't a plan. It was an act of desperation. It was a Thursday, about a month after the funeral. I'd made a big pot of beef stew, Eleanor's recipe, and I couldn't stand to look at it. The smell filled this empty cabin, and it was just too much. I was going to throw it out, but instead I walked to the edge of my property, to that line where my cleared land meets the deep, dark woods. There's a massive stump there, older than me, covered in a thick carpet of green moss. It felt like an altar, an old, forgotten place of offering. On a sudden impulse, I ladled the stew into a ceramic bowl and set it right in the center of the stump. I didn't expect anything. I wasn't looking for a monster. I was just getting rid of a memory I couldn't eat. I turned my back, walked back to my porch, and didn't look back. But the next morning, when I gathered the nerve to go and retrieve the bowl, it was there. And it was scraped clean, perfectly clean, not a drop left. That's how it started. That single, clean bowl. I felt a jolt. Not of fear, but of connection. A sign that I wasn't entirely alone in my grief. So the next Thursday, I did it again. And the next. For 52 years, every Thursday, just before dusk, I walked to that stump. Thursday is Thursday. It became my reason, my purpose. It gave me a rhythm. Monday, chop wood. Tuesday, check the fence line. Wednesday, prepare the offering. Thursday, deliver it. Friday, retrieve the bowl. It was a spine for a life that had collapsed. It pulled me out of the crushing grief and gave me a responsibility, a silent partnership. It was a secret that gave me the strength to face the sunrise each morning. I wasn't just a widower wasting away in the woods. I was a keeper, a guardian of a pact. I had a job to do, and in the deep woods of the Olympic Peninsula, having a job to do is what keeps the darkness at bay, both outside and in. It's what keeps you sane. But this last Thursday, something was wrong. I felt it the moment I stepped onto the porch. The air, which I know better than my own face in the mirror, was different. The familiar scent of pine and damp earth was there, but it was cut with something else, something sharp and unnatural, like the smell of ozone after a lightning strike. But there was no storm. The sky was clear and cold, a deep, star-pricked indigo. The woods were quiet, too quiet. The usual evening chorus of insects and frogs was gone. A profound, listening silence had fallen over the land, the kind that precedes an earthquake or the arrival of a predator. It was a dead quiet that made the fine hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stand on end. Every instinct I've honed over a lifetime of living out here was screaming at me, screaming that something had trespassed, something had broken the peace, something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Still, routine is a powerful thing. It's a dam against chaos. So I did what I always do. I had a piece of venison steak, left over from a deer I'd taken last fall. I placed it on the clean plate I always use, walked the familiar path to the stump, and set it down. My feet knew the way, even if my mind was racing. Every step felt heavier than usual. The silence was so complete that I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. I placed the plate down, turned my back, without looking towards the tree line. That was always part of the rule. Never look, and started my walk back to the cabin. I was listening. I'm always listening. I was waiting for the sound I knew so well, the one I'd learned to anticipate over 5 decades. The sound that meant my offering was accepted and the world was, for another week, in balance. The sound of a heavy, deliberate tread, the slow, cracking footsteps of something immense moving through the underbrush. The footsteps never came. I stood on my porch, the cold wood pressing into my socked feet, and waited. The venison steak sat on the stump, untouched. The silence stretched on, becoming a physical presence. It was a suffocating blanket, a void where there should have been life. And then, from the darkness just beyond the stump, from the place where the shadows are deepest, a sound cut through the stillness. It wasn't a twig snap. It wasn't the grunt of a bear or the cry of a cougar. It was a single, sharp snap of metal. It was a cold, precise, and utterly alien sound in these woods. It sounded like a bear trap, but faster, cleaner, like a piece of machinery failing. It was a sound that had no business being there. It spoke of iron and gears and cold, human design. It was the sound of the outside world, the world I'd built this life to escape, invading my sanctuary. It was the sound of a lock clicking shut, or a lock breaking open. I didn't know which was worse. In 52 years, this had never happened. The ritual had never been broken. The silence had never been violated by a sound like that. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every part of me, the part that had survived decades out here by being cautious, screamed at me to go inside, lock the door, and put a chair under the knob. The animal brain says, that sound is not of this place. It is a threat. You are old. You are slow. You are vulnerable. Hide. Wait for the sun. That is the voice of survival. It's the voice that keeps you alive. It's the sensible voice. But then there was another thought, a quieter one, but heavier. A 52-year-old thought. A thought that was tied to Eleanor, to the clean bowl, to the purpose that had saved my life. What about him? What did that sound mean for him? My safety or my secret? My life or the pact that had become my life? That was the choice, laid bare in the chilling silence of a Thursday night. The instinct for self-preservation is a powerful tide, but loyalty is a rock, a thing you build your life on. I couldn't just hide. I couldn't abandon the other half of this silent conversation that had spanned more than half a century. I didn't run out there into the darkness. I'm not a fool. But I stood my ground on that porch, a sentinel at the edge of my own fear. I decided, right then, that I had to know. But I also knew with a certainty that chilled me more than the night air, that I could never tell anyone. I couldn't call the sheriff. What would I say? I think a machine just snapped near the spot where I feed Bigfoot. They'd send a nice young deputy out, and then a nice young doctor. No, this secret had been mine to carry in peace. Now it was mine to carry in fear. My choice was made. I would face this alone. I would protect this secret, whatever the cost. The first step was to wait for dawn, and to keep my mouth shut. The silence of the woods had been broken, but my own silence had to hold. That metallic snap, it was the sound of my world breaking. The end of a long, quiet peace, and the beginning of this. The beginning of the story I am telling you now. For 52 years, I was just a man leaving food on a stump. After that sound, I became something else. A witness, a guardian, and a target. I know this is a lot to take in. It sounds like the rambling of an old man lost in his memories. But that sound was real. The fear was real. And the object I would eventually find. It was more real and more terrifying than anything I could ever imagine. So, if you felt even a fraction of the chill I felt that night, if there's a part of you that needs to know what made that sound, then please, stay with me. Do an old man a favor. Hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel, and share this story. You need to hear what came next. The pact was about to be defined by rules I never knew existed, and the price for breaking them was terrifyingly clear. The pact was unspoken, born of my own grief and a solitude, so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing on my chest. After that first clean bowl, I continued the ritual, half convinced I was just feeding a clever bear or a pack of raccoons. But the feeling was different. The crushing silence of the cabin started to feel less like an absence and more like a quiet anticipation. I had a purpose again, a tiny pinprick of light in the vast darkness left by Eleanor's passing. Every Thursday, as dusk began to bleed purple and orange into the sky, I would make the walk to the mossy stump. It became a pilgrimage. A walk from my world of loss into a world of possibility. It was a silent agreement. A conversation held across the boundary of what is seen and what is hidden. I provide food, a small comfort against the harshness of the wild. And in return, the woods gave me a reason to keep going. A sign that even in the deepest wilderness, you are not truly, completely alone. That was the bargain. A week after the first stew, the unspoken conversation truly began. I left a small loaf of fresh-baked sourdough bread, still warm from my oven, wrapped in a cloth. The next morning, as had become my new routine, I went to retrieve the dish. The cloth was neatly folded to one side, and the bowl was, as always, wiped clean. But this time, something else was there. Placed precisely in the center of the clean ceramic was a stone. It wasn't just any rock kicked up from the forest floor. It was perfectly spherical, a dark gray river stone worn impossibly smooth by eons of water and time. It was cool to the touch, and it fit in the palm of my hand as if it were made to be held. There was an undeniable deliberation to its placement. It wasn't an accident. It was an answer. It was a payment. It was the first word spoken back to me from the quiet woods. A piece of the wild world offered in exchange for a piece of mine. It felt ancient and profound. A gesture that transcended language. It was, I knew instantly, a thank you. I took the stone back to the cabin, my mind reeling. An animal doesn't do that. A bear doesn't select a perfectly round stone and place it in the middle of a bowl. This was an act of intelligence, of reciprocity. It was a gesture that said, I see what you are doing, and I acknowledge it. I held the stone, its weight a solid, grounding presence in my hand. That single object changed everything. It transformed my weekly act of grief into a genuine exchange. I wasn't just throwing food into the void anymore. I was engaged in a dialogue. I placed the stone on the rough-hewn mantelpiece of my fireplace, right next to the silver-framed photograph of Eleanor. It looked strange there, a piece of raw nature next to a captured memory, but it felt right. They were the two anchors of my life now, the woman I had lost and the secret I had found. That smooth, dark stone was the first piece of physical evidence, the first tangible proof that my pact was real. It was a secret I could hold, a silent promise I could touch. The rules of our arrangement became clear, not through words, but through trial and error. I was the student in this silent school. One evening, driven by a burning curiosity I couldn't suppress, I decided to wait. I left the food as usual, but instead of returning to the cabin, I hid behind a thicket of ferns on my porch, peering into the growing darkness. And I waited. The hours crawled by. The moon rose, casting long shadows across the clearing. The food sat on the stump, untouched. The air felt heavy, not with presence, but with an expectant stillness, a quiet refusal. The woods were waiting for me to leave. It was a long, cold, and lonely vigil. At dawn, defeated, I went back inside. Only then, when I was no longer watching, was the offering taken. The message was unmistakable. Trust is the foundation of this pact. You must leave the offering, turn your back, and walk away. You do not watch, you do not spy. My presence was an intrusion, a violation of the sacred space of the exchange. It was a rule I never dared to break again. In the months and years that followed, the gifts from the woods grew more sophisticated. They were no longer just symbolic gestures like the stone. They became practical, useful. One Friday morning, I found the stump piled high with a mound of perfect, golden chanterelle mushrooms. A small fortune's worth, more than I could ever find on my own in a full day of foraging. They were fresh, fragrant, and laid out on a bed of clean moss, as if presented at a market. This wasn't a random find. It showed a deep understanding of the forest's resources, but also an understanding of me. It knew I foraged. It knew what was valuable to a man living off the land. This was a gift of provision, a direct reciprocation for the food I provided. It was as if it was saying, "You feed me from your world, so I will feed you from mine." It was a sign of a deepening partnership, an acknowledgement that we were both creatures of this place, sharing in its bounty and helping each other to survive within it. Then came the warnings. This was the shift that truly defined our relationship. It moved beyond a simple bartering of goods into something far deeper, a bond of mutual protection. One afternoon, I was heading toward the southern edge of my property to check on a stand of old-growth cedars. My path was blocked. A massive alder branch, far too thick and heavy for the wind to have moved, was laid directly across the narrow trail. It wasn't a fallen tree. It was placed there deliberately, a clear barrier. Annoyed at first, I pushed through, but a nagging instinct made me cautious. I moved slowly, quietly, and about 50 yards past the branch, I smelled it. The distinct, musky scent of a large predator. I peered through the underbrush and saw the den tucked under the roots of a fallen giant. A mother cougar, sleek and powerful, was nursing 3 tiny spotted cubs. The branch hadn't been an obstacle. It had been a shield. It had saved me from stumbling into a mother cat's nursery, a mistake that could have easily been my last. The most unambiguous warning came the following spring. I was walking the western fence line, hammer and staples in hand, making my usual repairs after the winter thaw. There, laid perfectly in the center of the path I always took, was a dead rattlesnake. It wasn't mangled or half-eaten as a hawk or a coyote would have left it. It was laid out straight, almost ceremonially. Its head was crushed, a single, decisive act of violence. But the rest of its body, including the rattle, was completely intact. The message was as clear as if it had been spoken aloud. Danger was here. I was walking towards it, and you took care of it. This isn't just a shared space anymore. This is my territory, and in my territory, you are safe. That dead snake was a chilling, profound declaration of guardianship. It was no longer just a secret I was keeping. It was a protector I was tending to. Our pact had become a matter of life and death, and my Thursday offerings felt less like a choice and more like a sacred, necessary duty. Thursday is Thursday. This was not the behavior of an animal. This was the mark of a mind. Animals are driven by instinct, by the immediate needs of hunger and survival. They can be clever, yes, but this was different. This was observation, pattern recognition, and forethought. It understood my habits, my paths, my vulnerabilities. It knew which mushrooms I gathered, which trails I walked, and what dangers lay hidden in the woods that I couldn't see. The being in the forest wasn't just a creature. It was a resident, a neighbor, a silent partner in the lonely business of living. This realization settled deep inside me, a core of warmth, but also a core of profound, isolating awe. How do you explain to someone that your closest neighbor is a 10-foot-tall cryptid who communicates with dead snakes and mushrooms? You don't, you can't. You carry the secret, and the weight of it presses you further into your own solitude, even as the secret itself is the only thing keeping you from being completely alone in it. My journal, which had started as a simple log of weather and chores, became my sole confidant. In its worn, leather-bound pages, I documented the exchange. I drew the smooth riverstone, sketched the shape of the chanterelle pile, and mapped the exact location of the warning branch and the dead snake. I wrote down my theories, my fears, my questions. The journal was the only place I could be honest, the only place this impossible reality could exist outside of my own head. It was my attempt to build a bridge of reason over a chasm of unbelievable truth, to prove to myself, day after day, that I wasn't losing my mind. But even in this most private of records, there was a line I would not cross. There was one memory, one single heart-stopping moment from those early years, that was too sacred, too terrifying, to be captured by ink on a page. It was a secret I kept even from my own journal, a secret that formed the very bedrock of my conviction, a truth I would carry to my grave. The moment happened on a wild November night, about 2 years into our ritual. A wicked storm, born in the Gulf of Alaska, slammed into the peninsula without warning. The wind screamed through the firs like a grieving banshee, and the rain came down not in drops, but in solid, wind-driven sheets that threatened to peel the shingles from my roof. It was a Thursday, and I was late. The sheer violence of the storm had kept me inside, but a gnawing anxiety, a feeling of having broken a promise, began to eat at me. I couldn't fail the pact, not now. Pulling on my heavy oilskin coat and grabbing the bowl of venison stew I'd prepared, I threw open the door and plunged into the maelstrom. The wind nearly tore the bowl from my hands as I fought my way, step by agonizing step, through the lashing rain and roaring darkness toward the stump. The world had dissolved into a chaos of noise and water, and I felt impossibly small and fragile against the storm's fury. As I finally reached the stump, gasping for breath, soaked to the bone and shivering, I leaned down to place the bowl in its designated spot. At that exact second, a massive, brilliant fork of lightning tore across the sky. For a single, silent, heart-stopping beat, the entire clearing was illuminated in a stark, bluish-white light, brighter than day. The world was frozen in a flash of divine and terrible clarity, and I saw it. It wasn't a story. It wasn't a shadow. It was there, standing just inside the tree line, partially shielded from the deluge by the sweeping boughs of an ancient cedar. It was a towering, broad-shouldered shape, covered from head to toe in a thick, matted coat of dark rain-slicked fur. It wasn't a bear. The proportions were wrong. The stance was too human. It was simply standing there, utterly still, watching me through the curtain of the storm. In that bleached white moment, the myth became flesh, and it was bigger and far more real than I had ever dared to imagine. My heart seized in my chest. In that blinding flash, I expected to see the cold green-gold reflection of an animal's eyes, a feral glare, but that's not what I saw. For that one eternal second, our gazes locked across the storm-tossed clearing and its eyes. They were not the eyes of a beast. They were deep-set and dark, nestled in a weathered, strangely human-like face. And they held an expression. It was an expression of profound, weary intelligence. I saw a depth in them that stunned me, a knowledge that felt ancient, as if it had witnessed the turning of seasons for 1,000 years. But more than that, I saw a sorrow, a deep, bone-weary solitude that resonated with the hollow ache in my own soul. It was the look of someone else who was utterly alone in the world, a fellow traveler in a long and lonely exile. We were two solitary beings, caught in the same storm, on the same small patch of earth, sharing a moment of impossible recognition. It wasn't a monster, it was a person. Then, the thunder crashed, a deafening explosion that shook the very ground beneath my feet, and the world was plunged back into absolute darkness and roaring chaos. I was left standing there, frozen, the rain plastering my grey hair to my skull, the now cool bowl of stew completely forgotten in my trembling hands. My mind was a blank slate, wiped clean by the after-image of those eyes. When the next, more distant flicker of lightning offered a brief, dim glimpse of the tree line, it was gone. It had vanished back into the deep woods, as silently and completely as a shadow melting into a deeper shadow. It was as if it had never been there at all. But it had. I knew it had. That shared gaze wasn't a glimpse of a passing creature. It was an acknowledgement. It was a confirmation. It was a silent, solemn handshake across the species divide. A moment of terrifying, sacred communion that changed me forever. The storm raged on, but inside me, a profound calm had settled. That single, shared look in the heart of the storm cemented everything. It moved my secret from the realm of belief into the realm of undeniable fact. It made the pact sacred. From that day forward, I was no longer just appeasing a mystery. I was protecting a person. I never spoke of it, not to anyone. I never even wrote it down in my journal. To try and describe those eyes with mere words felt like a betrayal, a profanity. It would be like trying to describe the vastness of the night sky by drawing a single star on a piece of paper. The memory was too immense, too personal. It was a truth I would carry locked in my heart. This was the moment our unspoken pact was truly sealed, not with a gift or a warning, but with a shared glance of mutual solitude. I knew then that I would protect this secret, this soul, with everything I had. My weekly offering was no longer just about my own survival. It was about his, and I would never, ever fail him. Thursday is Thursday. It's a promise. Over the years, our silent conversation deepened, settling into a rhythm that became the new normal of my life. The fear I felt that night in the storm softened into a profound and constant awe. The Thursday offerings were no longer about assuaging my own loneliness. They were a duty, a quiet affirmation of the pact we'd sealed without a single word. My life was divided into two distinct worlds: the mundane solitude of the cabin, with its chores and memories, and the sacred, secret world of the stump. I would spend my days working in my garden or maintaining the property, and I took to whistling. I'd whistle old tunes Eleanor and I used to dance to in the kitchen. Simple, jaunty melodies that felt out of place in the vast silence. I did it for myself, to fill the quiet. I never imagined anyone was listening. I never imagined a memory I held so dearly could be shared, let alone understood, by the wild, ancient thing in the woods. The woods have eyes, I had come to believe, but I was about to learn they had ears, and a memory, too. It happened on a crisp autumn evening. I was on the porch, cleaning my rifle, when I heard it. Drifting from the deep woods, from the direction of the stump, was a sound. It was a low, resonant humming, almost like the thrum of a giant cello string. The melody was unmistakable. It was crooked, disjointed, with notes missing and the rhythm slightly off, like a record played at the wrong speed. But it was there. It was the tune I'd been whistling for weeks, one of Eleanor's favorites, Sentimental Journey. My hands froze on the rifle. The cold metal grew slick in my grip. It was a mimicry, an echo of my own private grief returned to me from the heart of the wilderness. It was the most profound and unsettling thing I had ever experienced. It was a gesture that went beyond warnings or gifts. It was an attempt at connection, at sharing a piece of my humanity. It was saying, "I hear you, I remember." In that moment, the line between man and beast didn't just blur. It evaporated completely. The signs it left began to get stranger, more intricate. It was as if, having established a deeper connection, it was now trying to show me things about its world. I'd find strange, deliberate patterns made of sticks and stones laid out near the property line. They weren't random arrangements. They were too ordered, too symmetrical. They almost looked like maps of constellations, but none that I recognized from any star chart. Many of these patterns were placed along the path leading to an old, abandoned rock quarry on the far side of my land, a desolate place of shattered stone and stagnant pools of water. I realized, after a time, that the creature itself would never go near the quarry. It fiercely avoided it. The stick patterns always seemed to point away from it, like arrows directing traffic away from a disaster. It was a place of bad memory, a scar on the land it wanted me to see. And to avoid, I didn't understand why, but I respected the silent warning. I never went near the quarry again. The first real threat to our quiet existence came not from the forest, but from the relentless grind of the human world. It started as a low hum on the horizon, a sound that grew louder over the course of a summer, the distant whine of chainsaws and the rumble of heavy machinery. A logging company had bought the rights to a tract of state land adjacent to mine. For years, the National Forest had been a buffer, a vast, silent cathedral of green that protected my sanctuary. But the world of men, with its insatiable appetite for resources, was chewing at the edges, and the sound was a constant grinding reminder that my peace was conditional, my isolation an illusion. I'd stand on my porch and listen to the faint screams of falling giants, and a cold dread would settle in my gut. Every fallen tree felt like a brick being removed from the wall that shielded my secret, a wall that was about to be breached in a way I had not anticipated. The breach came in the form of a small, offensively bright piece of plastic. I was walking my fence line when I saw it, a streamer of shocking pink survey tape tied around the trunk of a 400-year-old cedar. It was well inside the boundary of what I considered its territory, a place no human had set foot in decades. My heart went cold. I followed the line and found another and another, a trail of garish pink wounds on the ancient bark leading deeper into the woods, closer to the hidden places, closer to the stump, closer to the heart of my secret. It was a violation, a desecration. The loggers weren't just taking trees. They were mapping, measuring, and claiming. They were drawing lines on a world that was supposed to be without them. And their lines were leading them straight into a collision course with a truth they were not prepared to handle. A truth that, if cornered, would not go quietly. The woods have eyes, and they were watching this intrusion with a growing sense of alarm. That night, the forest answered. As dusk settled, a sound began that was unlike anything I had ever heard before. It wasn't the howl of a wolf or the scream of a cougar. It was a low, guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. It was a sound of pure, territorial rage, a vibration that traveled through the floorboards of my cabin and rattled the glass in the window frames. It went on for hours, a deep, resonant threat that promised violence. I sat in my armchair in the dark, my old shotgun across my lap, not out of fear for myself, but out of fear of what I knew was out there. I was terrified of what it might do to protect its home, and what the consequences of that action would be. This wasn't a warning for me. This was a declaration of war against the intruders, and I was caught directly in the middle, a helpless ambassador between two worlds that were about to tear each other apart. The peace I had so carefully cultivated for decades was shattering. The next morning, the woods were eerily silent. The growling had stopped. A heavy fog hung over the land, muffling all sound. With my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs, I made my way to the stump. The offering from the previous day was gone, the bowl clean, but next to it sat a strange, metallic object. It was the logger's theodolite, the expensive surveying instrument they used to measure angles and distances. Or what was left of it. It had been ripped from its tripod, and the thick, sturdy aluminum legs were bent and twisted into a pretzel, as if a giant had casually crumpled them in his fist. The delicate optics were shattered. It was an act of precise and terrifying strength. It wasn't the mindless rampage of a bear. This was a message, delivered with surgical intent. This is what I think of your lines. This is what I will do to your machines. Leave now. I stood there, the cold morning air burning my lungs, staring at the mangled piece of equipment. The warning shot had been fired. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I was the only one who could prevent a bloodbath. The loggers would be back for their equipment. They would see the damage, assume it was a bear or vandals, and they would likely come back with rifles and a determination to secure their work site. An encounter was now not just possible, it was inevitable, unless I did something. The burden of this 50-year-old secret had suddenly become terrifyingly heavy. It was no longer a private pact that brought me comfort. It was a public crisis that demanded I risk everything. I had to intervene. I had to become an active participant in this conflict, a saboteur. I had to choose a side, and I had already chosen it, 2 years into the pact, on a stormy night when I looked into a pair of ancient, sorrowful eyes. My choice was to protect him, and that meant I had to drive the loggers away myself, by any means necessary. My quiet life in the woods was over. The next morning, before the sun had even crested the eastern ridge, I went to work. Under the concealing shroud of the thick peninsular fog, I became a trespasser on my own doorstep. I moved through the woods, following the trail of